Somewhere in a modest home in Cottage City, Maryland, in the winter of 1949, a 14-year-old boy woke up to the sound of scratching inside the walls of his bedroom. It was a sound that would not stop, a sound that marked the beginning of one of the most meticulously documented cases of demonic possession in American history. The boy, known only by the pseudonym Roland Doe to protect his identity for the rest of his life, had recently experienced the death of someone very close to him. His Aunt Harriet had passed away just weeks earlier, and she had been more than just family to the boy. She had been his guide into a world that most adults warned children to avoid. Aunt Harriet had introduced Roland to the Ouija board, teaching him how to place his fingers on the planchette and ask questions of the spirits she believed lingered just beyond the veil of our visible world. After her death, Roland missed her desperately. In his grief, he did what she had taught him. He took out the Ouija board and tried to contact her spirit. He sat alone in his room, fingers trembling on the wooden pointer, and asked if she was there. Something answered, but it was not Aunt Harriet. The scratching sounds were only the beginning. Within days of Roland's solitary Ouija sessions, the family began noticing objects moving in their home. Small items at first, things that could be explained away as coincidence or carelessness. A picture frame shifting on a shelf, a book falling from a table, but soon the phenomena escalated beyond any rational explanation. Furniture slid across floors with no one touching it, doors slammed in empty rooms, and then the activity centered itself on Roland. His bed began to shake at night, not with small tremors, but with violent convulsions that threw him against the headboard and made sleep impossible. His parents heard the sounds and came running. They watched with their own eyes as their son's mattress bucked and heaved as if something beneath it was trying to break free. They held him as he cried in terror, unable to understand what was happening to him. Roland's family were devout Lutherans, people of faith who believed in God and the power of prayer. They sought help from their minister, a man they trusted and respected. The minister came to the house and witnessed the phenomena himself. He saw the bed move, he heard the scratching, he prayed over Roland and tried to bring peace to the home, but nothing changed. If anything, the activity grew worse. The minister, out of his depth and frightened by what he had seen, suggested the family consult a psychiatrist. Perhaps this was some manifestation of grief, some psychological trauma expressing itself in ways that mimicked the supernatural. The psychiatrist evaluated Roland and found a boy who was frightened, confused, but not mentally ill. There was no diagnosis that fit what was happening. The psychiatrist could offer no help. Desperate and with nowhere else to turn, the family reached out to the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church had protocols for this. They had centuries of experience with the demonic. They had rituals designed specifically to confront what was happening to Roland. Father Edward Hughes was one of the first priests to respond to the family's plea. He came to the house and began the preliminary investigations required before the church would authorize an exorcism. What he witnessed convinced him that this was not a case of adolescent turmoil or family dysfunction. He saw words scratching themselves into Roland's skin. Readable letters appeared on the boy's chest and arms as if carved by an invisible blade, spelling out obscenities and commands. He heard Roland's voice change, dropping into registers that a 14-year-old boy's vocal cords should not be able to produce. The voice that came from Roland spoke in Latin, delivering phrases from theological texts that the boy had never studied and could not have known. Father Hughes made his recommendation. This was a case that required exorcism. The church authorized the ritual and Father Hughes began, but the entity inside Roland fought back. During one of the early sessions, something happened that would be documented in the official Jesuit records of the case. A spring from Roland's mattress worked itself loose during the ritual. It flew through the air and slashed Father Hughes across the arm, cutting him badly enough that he required medical attention. The priest was injured by an object that had moved with no human hand to guide it. The exorcism could not continue in Cottage City. The family, overwhelmed and terrified, decided to relocate to St. Louis, Missouri, hoping that distance from the site of the initial haunting might weaken whatever had attached itself to their son. It did not. In St. Louis, the case was taken up by Father William Bowden and his assistant, Father Walter Halloran. These Jesuit priests understood that they were facing something that required sustained spiritual warfare. They began a series of exorcism sessions that would eventually number 30 separate rituals conducted over the course of nearly 2 months. What they witnessed during those sessions was documented in diaries that both men kept, records that would survive to become some of the most important source material on possession in modern religious history. Roland's bed levitated. Multiple witnesses saw it rise from the floor with the boy in it. He spoke in languages he did not know. He displayed knowledge of private details about the priests' lives that he had no way of knowing. He attacked them physically with a strength that should have been impossible for a boy his size. Father Halloran's nose was broken during one violent episode. Roland urinated on the priest with what witnesses described as unnatural force and trajectory. The boy vomited repeatedly, spat at anyone who came near, and thrashed so violently that it took multiple grown men to hold him down during the rituals. But Father Halloran also documented the moments between the violent episodes, the times when Roland would surface from whatever was controlling him and beg for help, with tears streaming down his face. The boy was trapped inside his own body, aware during his lucid moments that something else was using him. He was a victim and a prisoner. The priests understood this. They did not give up on him. For weeks, Father Bowden and Father Halloran returned day after day to perform the ritual of exorcism. They prayed in Latin. They commanded the demon to identify itself. They invoked the authority of Christ and the protection of the saints. They were insulted, threatened, physically attacked, and exhausted, but they continued. On April 18, 1949, during the 30th exorcism session, something changed. Roland stopped thrashing. His body relaxed. When he spoke, it was in his own voice, clear and calm. He described a vision that he was seeing at that moment. He saw Saint Michael the Archangel, radiant and armed, standing before a dark figure. He heard Michael's voice commanding Satan to leave. And then it was over. The room, which had been filled with the stench of vomit and sweat and something worse, suddenly smelled of roses. Roland opened his eyes. He was himself again. The entity was gone. Father Halloran documented that Roland had no memory of the preceding months. The boy remembered his aunt dying. He remembered using the Ouija board. Then there was a gap, and he woke up in St. Louis surrounded by priests he did not know. He was confused but unharmed. The possession had left no permanent damage. Roland Doe went on to live a completely normal life. He married, had children, worked an ordinary job, and kept his identity secret until his death. Most people who knew him had no idea that he had once been the center of one of the most terrifying documented cases in paranormal history. Ed and Lorraine Warren did not investigate the Roland Doe case themselves. The events of 1949 occurred before they had established themselves as paranormal researchers, but they studied the case extensively throughout their careers. Ed Warren sought out Father Halloran, who, unlike many clergy involved in exorcisms, was willing to speak publicly about what he had witnessed. Halloran confirmed every detail to Ed: the levitation, the languages, the words carved into flesh, the supernatural strength, the violent attacks, the final moment of release. Ed Warren called the Roland Doe case the gold standard of American possession documentation because it had everything a skeptic might demand. Multiple credible witnesses, including ordained clergy, medical professionals who examined the boy, written records kept contemporaneously by the priests involved, physical evidence in the form of injuries to both the victim and the exorcists, and most importantly, a survivor who lived decades beyond the event, proving that exorcism could work and that deliverance was possible. The case became the direct inspiration for William Peter Blatty's novel The Exorcist, published in 1971, and the film adaptation directed by William Friedkin in 1973. That film terrified a generation and brought the concept of demonic possession into mainstream American consciousness. But what most people who watched the movie did not realize was that the story was not invented for entertainment. It was based on documented events that had been preserved in church archives and verified by men who had no reason to lie. Father Halloran gave interviews about the case for years before his death, always maintaining that what he witnessed was real and that the battle for Roland Doe's soul was the most important work he had ever done. The Warrens used the Roland Doe case in their lectures to demonstrate that possession was not a relic of medieval superstition, but a documented reality of the 20th century. They emphasized that the case had been handled properly, with the church following its protocols and with trained clergy conducting the rituals. They pointed out that Roland had been examined by doctors and psychiatrists before the exorcism was authorized, ruling out mental illness or fraud. And they highlighted the fact that Roland had lived a normal life after his deliverance, proving that even in the most extreme cases, there was hope for recovery. Ed Warren often said that the Roland Doe case was the single most important possession case in American history because it forced serious people to confront the reality of spiritual warfare. The scratching in the walls that began in a Maryland suburb in 1949 led to one of the longest and most dangerous exorcisms ever documented. And it ended with a boy being freed from something that should not exist, but did. Hashtags Haunted History, Paranormal Stories, Ed and Lorraine Warren, Theexorcist, Demon Possession, True Horror, Supernatural Exorcism, Warren Files, Haunted Places, Creepistories, Scaristories, Paranormal Investigation, True Crime Horror. This story was created with AI assistance based on documented paranormal case files. All events reference real investigations by Ed and Lorraine Warren.